Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would just relax, get in my place of Zen, and chat with you guys here this morning. I had a couple different people ask this. They basically pointed out that, hey, Chris Jones believes in doing really high volume training so that you can hit all the angles of a muscle. And let's talk about that for a minute, because I obviously don't necessarily believe the same thing. Now, I do want to state that obviously there's no beef between Chris Jones and I. We get along fine. We don't always agree on things, but Chris does him, I do me. He's very successful at what he does, and I don't have any problems with him. There's never been any shit talking between Chris and I. We don't really have any beef. We occasionally have a conversation. So, I think we're the type of people, though, that we can disagree on a point or say, hey, we're not even necessarily disagreeing. We're just looking at it from a different perspective. And it can be as simple as that. You can actually see something from a different perspective without it even turning into an argument. So let's talk about this. People say this, but they don't always think through what it means. When they think about hitting a muscle from every angle, I'll stop and ask the question. And I want all of you guys to ask that question yourself. What does that even mean? What does hitting a muscle from different angles even mean? Biologically, physiologically, biomechanically? Because some muscles, the only angles you have is the joint angle specificity. Joint angle specificity doesn't affect muscle growth. It only affects performance, like actual athletic performance, from the angles at which the strength transfers that you train a muscle at. Meaning a bicep, for example, it doesn't have angles. It just does this. That's all it does. It has one primary function. It attaches at 2 points. There's no angles to hit on a bicep. You're either flexing the bicep or you aren't. Now, strength transfer in athletic endeavors has to do with the points of strength at different angles of it, like how far down, how many degrees you are bending that muscle. But outside of that, there's not much else to a bicep. It's a very simple muscle. So if you think that working your bicep from different angles is going to affect growth in any way, I'm sorry, but that's ignorant. Anyone who believes that doesn't understand basic physiology. It just doesn't work that way. You can't target your inner and outer bicep, upper or lower bicep. It's not that complex of a muscle. Now, that being said, that's not necessarily true of every muscle in the body. But people don't think these things through with each individual muscle. And I think bodybuilders are bad about that, who don't learn basic anatomy and physiology. They oftentimes take this shotgun approach of, let me do 5 different exercises for a muscle group to make sure that I don't miss any heads or anything, and they don't really put any thought into it. And the thing is, with this high volume approach that guys like Chris do, who do take the shotgun approach, they need to consider that they may not want to train that way the rest of their life. Not everybody wants to spend an hour or two in the gym every day. A lot of people have lives who still want to gain muscle. They want to get bigger, they want to get stronger, who don't have time for all that nonsense and bullshit. People who aren't competing in anything, who have other lives outside of the gym, can't afford to do that. They really need to be more efficient about what they do with their time. They need to really think through, is this exercise I'm throwing in adding anything of benefit to me, or am I just burning calories in here wasting time? I got a job, I got a wife, or I got a girlfriend, I got friends, I got things I got to get done. Am I making my time in here count? People with no lives, or who this is their life or their career in some way, it's a little different. So we're talking about perspectives here, not right and wrong. I would say that for people who don't have the free time or don't want to spend hours and hours and hours training every week, they want to get in, get out, gain their muscle, and go home. Get up to other things that they enjoy. Even with Chris's philosophy of, rose for the hose, if you're spending all your time in the gym, you're not at home having sex. You're missing an extra sex session a day if you're spending an extra hour in the gym every day. It's real simple, guys. Now, that being said, people need to think these things through in the sense of, is what you are adding doing something that one of your other exercises didn't already hit? First of all, you need to realize that every exercise that works a muscle does work the entire muscle. It puts emphasis on different heads if it has multiple points of insertion. A bicep does not. Your chest does, for example. Now, your points of insertion are the same up here in the shoulders, but along the sternum, it's got multiple points, a whole band of insertions. And it has two different heads, but they do share a point of common insertion. Anytime you work that end, you are working the whole chest. Some exercises are going to work the upper and lower more than the rest, but they're still working it. And if you're doing a decent enough amount of volume, you may be stimulating near maximum growth in the entire chest anyways, just because that smaller amount of work adds up. Meaning a bench press might not hit your upper chest as well. But if you do enough of it, the upper chest is getting enough work anyways to see some good growth. And you have to factor that in. You can't just say, well, it's not getting any stimulation. It clearly is. Well, the next question I would ask you when you go to do that, well, what other exercises are you doing that are working the chest? Are you doing overhead press? You coming all the way down with it? If you are, that's a proven upper chest builder. Are you doing weighted chin-ups? EMG studies show that weighted chin-ups actually work the upper chest. So if you're doing a flat bench or a weighted dip, you're working your lower chest with some effect on the upper chest, but then you're throwing in things like push presses or overhead presses, weighted chin-ups, your whole chest is being worked. Now, you can decide for yourself, is it being worked enough to meet your satisfaction? I can't tell you, but you can't claim that you aren't getting solid stimulation through the entire chest with that combination of exercises. Do you need to go in and isolate it further? I don't know. Is it lagging? Is it lagging behind the rest of your body? All right, then maybe you do need to go in and isolate it. But pick your isolation movements based upon where you're lagging. Same thing, people will take something like the tricep and they'll say, well, it's got 3 heads. Well, you got to ask yourself, do those heads have different functions? In the bicep, the heads don't. 2 heads of the bicep, they don't have different functions with different exercises. The tricep, there is the long head up here, has a different function than the other 2 heads. It gets worked with any tricep exercise, but not as much with most tricep exercises. You actually have to do some specialized work to work the long head sometimes. So the difference comes down to, do you actually know what those muscles do? And if you don't, then you're forced to take a shotgun approach. If you don't know what that long head does, and a lot of you may not, you're listening to going, what's he talking about? Then you don't know how to work it, and you're throwing in random tricep exercises hoping to work it, but you're not working it correctly. You're not working that long head. Most guys will go do just standard tricep extensions, some standard ones with their elbows to the side, but they've been doing closed grip bench presses. They've been doing flat bench. Let me ask you a question. If you know anatomy of the tricep, are you working the same heads or different heads of the tricep doing those extensions that you did on the closed grip or the bench press? You're working the exact same heads. You're not actually adding any more long head work. The head that tends to lag from your presses and your other tricep work still isn't being worked by those extensions any more than it is on the bench press. So unless your whole tricep is lagging, have you helped yourself? You're already doing weighted dips. Do you really think that you're adding anything further by isolating these 2 lower heads? No, they're being worked by your weighted dips and your closed grip bench press insanely. In fact, your bench press is working it insanely. You have to have shoulder extension happen to get the long head. Well, that means you've got to actually do some stuff behind your head for the triceps, or you need to have extension on skull crushers to where you come back. Otherwise, you're not putting that stretch on the long head that actually works it. But incidentally, there are compound movements that work it also. Do they work it enough for you to be balanced? I don't know. It depends on the person now, doesn't it? That's what you have to look at and assess for yourself. But if you don't know the function of that, you don't know what exercises are hitting it. So you're just throwing random stuff in, hoping. That's not a good way to approach things. People need to look at a basic anatomy chart, look at exercises and figure out what they actually do. But what compound movements hit the long head? Anybody know? Do you know the weighted chin up actually puts a stretch on the long head? You can actually get DOMS and soreness in your long head from doing it. So if that is the one that's getting the least work, let's say you're doing closed grip bench press and weighted dips, and then you throw in some weighted chin ups, are you now working all three heads? Yeah. Is it enough? Maybe. Individual assessment. What other compound movements hit the long head to some extent? How about overhead pressing? Look at the anatomy of it. It is working the long head more than other presses do. Is it enough to get maximum growth? It depends on the individual. It depends on your genetics. It depends on where your lagging points are. But for many people, if they're already doing those other heavy compounds and they're throwing in an overhead press and a weighted chin up, they might not need to isolate the long head. It might develop fully on its own that way. Complex muscles like the deltoids. You got three heads. You got the anterior head, you got the lateral head, and you have the posterior head. They all have completely different points of insertion. They all have different functions, but there is an overlap with all of it. Meaning a bench press or an overhead press works the front head, but when we do studies, it does work the other two heads just to a very, very weak degree. Is it enough to really develop them? No. Will it cumulatively add to the workload of them? Yeah, probably. And I will point out, though, for people not on drugs, the deltoids are one of the hardest muscles to develop. They really are difficult for drug-free guys to grow impressive delts. It takes a lot of work. So that is a muscle that if you guys are trying to look better, you're going to need to do some research to really grow those muscles. But does it mean that you need to do countless numbers of side lateral raises to get them there? Probably not. There are compound movements that will work all three heads. So again, you can cut your volume back if you know this. What are they? Well, overhead presses of various types can work the side heads. Behind the neck presses can. But not everyone can safely do those exercises. If you can't, and you might need to isolate with some side lateral work. Rear head gets worked on all your rows, your chin-ups, your pull-ups, but so does the medial head to some extent. And face pulls, one of the best prehab exercises known to man that helps protect your shoulder joints, works the side and the rear head. So that lateral and posterior head actually get worked really, really heavily doing a face pull, which is again a fantastic prehab exercise. So if you're doing heavy overhead pressing, you're doing weighted chin-ups, and you're doing face pulls, your delts are actually, all three heads are getting really good stimulation. Is it enough to be balanced for some people? But at least if you know which of those compound movements are hitting all those heads, at least you know everything is getting worked to some extent. You don't need to come in and do as much isolation to develop those muscles if you already know how to hit them with compound movements. Then you can come in behind and say, okay, which of my heads is lagging the most from what I'm doing? This one, okay, well, I better isolate it. I better put in some extra work at that weak point. That is a more intelligent way for people to train who don't want to spend all day in the gym. They don't have time for it. Not everyone has time or the inclination to do that. They have better things to do with their time. You want to make efficient use of your time, understanding how these different muscles work and how to work them effectively with the least amount of volume to get you in and out of the gym faster, so that you can just put a little extra volume in on whatever your weak points are, your lagging points, because we all have them. You know, even professional bodybuilders have weak points and lagging points. Professional athletes have weak points and lagging points. It's normal. But if you know that you're working everything effectively because you've picked your exercises carefully, you don't need as much volume. You don't need as much random stuff thrown in trying to hit every angle, whether that angle actually is real or not, or whether the new exercises you're adding are even adding a new performance element. If you don't know, then you're just wasting time doing random stuff, hoping to get it right. A little basic understanding of anatomy and physiology can go a long way, particularly understanding which compound movements are going to hit a lot of those little muscles that people are worried about. Again, if you can come in and do 3 compound movements in less time than you can do 6 or 7 isolation movements to work all the same muscles, you can get in and out of the gym faster. You don't have to spend as much time in there and do as much volume to achieve what you were trying to achieve. And again, the point being, not everybody has the time or wants to spend all their time in the gym. A lot of people want to get in, get some results, put in a little bit of hard work every day or 3 days a week or 4 days a week, bust ass real quick, stimulate some gains, and go home and get on with their lives. They have better things to do. And a lot of the young guys who are in school and stuff don't understand that. But as you get older, that's something a lot of you are going to understand and value a lot more. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.